Greetings, humans. In case this is your first time on the show, I'm Mr. R, and this is the Bricks to Bits podcast. In this episode, I would like to share my thoughts on whether or not to use WordPress or other CMSs that are similar. And I want to begin by talking a little about my history in terms of web development. So, for anyone that doesn't know my background, I began building websites in 1999. And so at that time, building websites was extremely techy. You had to actually write HTML and, whatever else, depending on what you were building. But at minimum, you were writing HTML. And it was, back then I used to use Notepad, fresh out of Windows, just a regular blank Notepad. And building a website back then was extremely hard not in terms of like the coding, but just the approach. Like, we didn't really have really good standards for navigation and for like what different pages look like. So each page started like a whole brand new website, like trying to maintain consistency, figuring out the header, footer, sidebar, all of that stuff hadn't really been discovered yet. And so it was like each page was just a linked, completely new document starting with its own HTML. And so it's funny thinking back then, because like changing for a business to change the website was extremely hard to do. It was because all of that code was jumbled together, like the formatting, the images, if there's any JavaScript, so any of that, everything just intertwined. The approach for standardizing the separation of presentation, data, and logic had not, came out. I don't know, maybe there were people that were doing it, but I sure wasn't, or anyone else that I knew that was building stuff. And if you go to a Wayback Machine and look at web pages from back then, I mean, you can really tell that they were all over the place. And so then IDEs started coming out, like Front Page. I was in college at the time, and my professors would never let us use Front Page. We had to use Notepad. In fact, like, that was the standard. That was the only thing we was allowed to use to build a web page, was a Notepad. We wasn't allowed to use Dreamweaver or Front Page. Macromedia had Dreamweaver. Now, at this time, now mind you, I a few years later, like around 2001, 2002, somewhere in there, I began building things in Flash and PHP. So this was the this is what really set me apart from everyone else that was in college with me, and everyone else pretty much like set me on a trajectory where I was kind of like doing things that nobody else was into, because Flash at that time was making things move around on the screen. And so I learned action scripting, and I would build these really, really cool Flash websites, and that's what I started being known for. I would even build them for MySpace. So like I would put a big Flash header at the top of a MySpace and have it real complex, where you could do commerce and everything. Like, I had integrated PayPal, all sorts of cool stuff. All of this stuff is still available on Wayback Machine as well. In fact, maybe I'll link to some of those really, really old sites and things that I did. But here's where I'm going with it. The web, the approach for building things on the web, displaying things on the web, have come through an evolution. And WordPress, along with other CMSs, was what kind of came up next. It was part of the Web 2.0 movement. And it was pretty much what killed Flash. Web 2.0 and SEO is what, in my opinion, killed Flash, because Flash, although it was super cool, you couldn't, it was a solid SWF file, and search engines couldn't index in it. And also, it would get heavy, and Apple and iPhone became real popular, and they didn't want to support Flash. So all sorts of little things, like killed it. But in my opinion, it was more of like an approach. Like, in order to have a Flash site, you had to have a developer, you had to have a programmer. There was no real way of building like a content management system inside of a Flash site. And believe me, I've actually like tried doing it to a relative amount of success, actually, and there's other projects out there. But the thing is what became important is that Web 2.0 was about getting the non-programmer involved in publishing content on the web. Web 2.0 was all about giving a voice to the non-techie, to the person that's not sitting here hammering code in, and then also to the person that's not a business with big budgets. So, pretty much the only people that would publish content on the web back then was programmers and, big businesses that hired programmers. And so the CMS, so the content management system, and mind you, I'm not trying to say that the content management system is dead, but I want to just kind of point something out. The content management system allowed anyone that could send off an email pretty much to be able to add a title to a page, a body that could have images and, formatting of text, and then it can be published. And then you can have a theme that that basically, follow the particular design, and so that was pretty much the structure of the separation of presentation, data, and logic. So all of your functionality for displaying content in whatever order you want to display it in, and having links and or products and all of that stuff, all of that's functionality. But then the way it looks, the data, and then the way it looks, the presentation, the design, the colors, the style sheet, all of that stuff. And then finally the data, the actual content, the title, the description, the image that goes with it. All of that stuff was separated. And that's what made it possible for a person that's not a programmer to be able to build and publish content. And so I, in around 2004, 2005, around then, I began, in order to make money, I was offering services for an array of different platforms. So back then, OS Commerce was real popular. I had taken a personal project and done a lot of personal customizations for OS Commerce. I used to really, really be a huge fan of OS Commerce. And then also Magento. I tried to get into Magento, but Magento was kind of like overkill. And I had a couple of clients that had Magento, and so I did a little bit of work on it. But Drupal, and then Joomla. So those were like the main CMSs. And then I ended up getting a job at this advertising agency as a back-end programmer, and their CMS of choice was WordPress. It was funny because I had never used WordPress, never seen it before. And he hired me as a WordPress plugin developer. And so I had to hop in and learn WordPress. And WordPress was so much easier to use in terms of a content management system than any of the other platforms. I had been, doing all sorts of customizations and enhancements and building modules and all sorts for each of the popular CMS at the time. But when I noticed that, for our WordPress clients at that advertising agency I worked for, it was so easy to hand over WordPress to a client. it was so easy. I mean, it was so, like the approach, and then the platform. Oh my God, like the API, like you could extend WordPress so easily, with the plugins and themes in a way that you just couldn't. Like, it was so much harder to do in Joomla and Drupal and the others. WordPress just made it so freaking easy. And so I drank the Kool-Aid. I was all in. I jumped 100% balls to the walls on the bandwagon. I stopped pretty much offering services for all the other platforms. It used to be a headache. Anytime someone would ask me to do something for anything other than WordPress, I would balk. I couldn't stand it. It ultimately ended up, for the next 15 years of my career, pretty much each of my company's names have been with a WP in front. So I've been a 100% WordPress extremist. I have built everything that you can imagine trying to build. I've built it out of WordPress by building custom plugins and themes. And I've tried to do everything that can be done out of WordPress. And the reason why I say all of that is because now I'm back to square one. Now I come all the way back around and I look at everything that has evolved and where we're at with it all. And I'm going to be honest with you. The conclusion I've come to is that although WordPress has its purpose, it's not the best approach for most people. Here's what I mean by that. You're going to have to learn something. Let's imagine you know nothing about programming, you know nothing about WordPress, you know nothing about CMS or anything, but you want a website. If you sit back and you really, really think about it, all websites are pretty much the same thing. It's a couple of pages that say a few things about the product or service. There's a form, some links, and some pictures, a slider. To manage that in WordPress is, in my opinion, after it's all said and done, it's equivalent, even if you've got products, it's equivalent to like hammering in a nail with a bat. WordPress is an extremely robust application. Now, it's real easy to get wrapped up in all the benefits of WordPress. I'm a huge fan. But benefits to no reasoning isn't really a benefit at all. So, for example, if you've never used WordPress and if you've never written a line of code, writing or making a change to an HTML template, let's say you want to change the header title, the header text. Identifying that header text in just flat out raw HTML and making that change and uploading it to the server is probably magnitudes easier than learning how to log into WordPress and, first of all, structure a page in a way so that you have a home page that has a title for you to even try to change. It's real easy to feel like, since everything is drag and drop, point and click type, it's real easy to think that it's easier. But actually it's not. If a person gets past the fear of laying eyes on code, as long as you're not afraid to see lines of code, I think that I could teach you to manage a raw HTML site much easier than teaching you to manage a WordPress site. And the benefits are tenfold. There are, when it comes to, for example, loading a page. WordPress fires off every plugin you've got in the site. WordPress makes you feel like you can just load it up with all type of functionality and things like that. If you look at it though, you'll see that the average person putting tons of plugins into a site to begin with, they're doing a disservice. They're not really building a platform that's optimized for the visitor, right? Like things are going to load slow, it's going to conflict, there's going to be all sorts of things that have to be managed and updated, and there's security risks and all sorts of things. That on the flip side, like if you just buy an HTML template and make changes to it, that page just loads. You know, if you need an accordion, just buy a template with accordion, or buy a Bootstrap template, or just learn Bootstrap. The thing is that you learning to make changes in code is probably going to be a lot easier than learning to navigate inside of a CMS and learning the logic between navigation and all of the different things. Now, naturally, it's going to depend on what the ultimate goals are. But I am going to, in my tutorials, instead of making lots of WordPress tutorials and things like that, like I've always done, I'm going to be making a lot of just flat out HTML, JavaScript, PHP tutorials. Just showing how to do things that way. And I'm not going to teach programming per se, you know. I'll provide programming snippets and code snippets and show how to do things. But I'm going to teach developing or managing a website without doing it the big, heavy CMS way. And this is important because, like I said, the last 15 years or so, the only thing I've focused on is WordPress. And so, let me know your thoughts. Thanks for listening. Until next time, peace.